Let's go work. Vámonos.
He was the youngest member of President Obama's cabinet, and he's planning to bring his message to all 50 states.
We say no to building a wall and yes to building community.
Former HUD Secretary Julián Castro could become the first Hispanic commander-in-chief. His positions on everything from immigration to education to impeachment have made him a major name on the left.
My grandmother, that I grew up with, Julián Castro, came across in 1922.
Pay teachers what they deserve.
I was the first one to say of the 2020 candidates that they should begin impeachment proceedings.
The former San Antonio mayor has had his share of political victories and defeats. Could 2020 be the year he reaches the top?
Good evening from Tempe Center for the Arts, just a stone's throw from Phoenix, here in Tempe, Arizona. I'm Brett Baer.
And I'm Martha McCallum. Temperature here hit 108, maybe somewhere in that range today. And the race for the Democratic nomination is also heating up as these candidates start to define themselves for voters. And Julián Castro will get that chance here tonight.
That's right. We are sitting in Maricopa County, not far from our southern border with Mexico. Border security, immigration, of course, one of the most consequential issues of the 2020 election. Maricopa went for President Trump in 2016, as did the entire state of Arizona, which has been solidly red for the past 5 presidential elections. But
Democrats believe that landscape is changing somewhat. Arizona is now over 30% Latino, some of whom do not support the president's immigration policies.
And also, add to that, some Democratic midterm victories like the one by Senator Kyrsten Sinema. And some say you've got a state now in Arizona that is much more purple and up for grabs.
Julián Castro is the only Latino in the 2020 race. He says that he can offer a path to victory that includes winning the 11 electoral votes right here in Arizona. So let's ask him how he's going to do that. Ladies and gentlemen, Julián Castro.
Mr. Secretary, thanks for coming.
Hi there. Thank you so much. Great to see you, too. Thank you so much for being here.
Good to see you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all for having me.
Great
Congratulations on making the first debate stage, just announced by the DNC.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, I know they just put out their statement, and I want to thank all the folks who helped us get to that 65,000 donor threshold to get on the debate stage. I'm looking forward to being there soon.
All right, so let's jump in. We want to start with a question before we get to the audience, something that is, sort of topical and in the headlines today. A big story as Democrats and even some Republicans are criticizing the president for saying that he would listen to opposition research from a foreign government if it was offered in 2020. But I guess one of the questions from the other side that comes up is how is that really different than the Democrats funding the Steele dossier in 2016 through a British operative who they knew had Russian sources? How is that different?
Well, first of all, I don't think that we should distract our attention from the fact that you have an unprecedented situation here of a president of the United States who, if I remember the video correctly, was actually sitting in the Oval Office behind his desk saying that he would take intelligence against his political opponent from a foreign government. I think it's safe to say we have never seen that kind of moment in American history, and that's not a good thing. And so instead of deflection or trying to argue that other people did it, I don't believe that's true. That's a different circumstance. But the reason that you've seen so many people say, what in the world is wrong with you to Donald Trump when he said this yesterday is because we can't imagine that the leader of our country would actually welcome a foreign government to go out and gather intelligence about a political opponent and then share that with a candidate or with the president. I have said that I believe this president should be impeached and that the Mueller report laid out 10 different instances where the president either obstructed justice or tried to obstruct justice. And yesterday was one more example of why that's the case. I think, a few years from now, whether it's 10 years from now, 20 years from now, we're going to look back on this as Americans, not Republicans or Democrats or liberals or conservatives, and say, what in the hell was wrong with that president?
You know, and there has been bipartisan pushback. You know that, Republicans and Democrats talking about concern about foreign influence, foreign interference, and bipartisan pushback on how he answered that question. But to Martha's question at the end there, what do you say to the people who look at Hillary Clinton's campaign spokesman, Brian Fallon? He told the Washington Post in October 2017, "The first I learned of Christopher Steele or saw any dossier was after the election, but if I had gotten handed it last fall, I would have had no problem passing it along and urging reporters to look into it. Opposition research happens on every campaign." Understanding what you're saying about the framing of the moment, but you see the concern about the double standard here.
What I remember about that situation was that the late Senator John McCain of this state of Arizona, an honorable man who had served his country honorably, and who, by the way, the president goes out of his way to insult even after his passing, which I think is unpresidential. What I remember is that he and others did go to the proper authorities, to the intelligence agencies with that information. And so the question on the table for the president yesterday was, if this kind of information came your way, would you go to the FBI? Would you go to our intelligence agencies? Well, that's exactly what John McCain did with that information. So these situations are just completely different. And what's most important is not what happened in the past. I don't understand why on this network and in so many, conservative circles, people are still talking about Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton is not on the ballot. Those of us who are running are on the ballot. And I can tell you that those of us who are running want to focus on the issues that are important to Americans and their families. And they also, I think Americans want a president that they believe has integrity, that is sitting behind the Oval Office and is honest and is, accountable to the American people and will put the national interest above his own personal interest. What you saw yesterday in that moment was a man who very clearly is willing to put his own selfish political interests above even the interests of national security of this country.
Yeah, Mr. Secretary, we're going to move on. But, the Hillary Clinton part, obviously, is about the beginning of the investigation. There are things happening that people are trying to get to the bottom of. We'll let that play out and cover it as it comes. But that's why it's the focus of the funding of the dossier and Christopher Steele. Let's get to our first questioner from the town hall.
Which goes to exactly what you're talking about, which is getting to some of these issues that are very important to people's lives in America. Trade, immigration, of course, have dominated the political arena here as we look at this in the border state of Arizona. Alicia Cunha, a reporter, is going to give us a little bit of a closer look at that story first. Let's watch.
The Arizona Chamber of Commerce says $9 billion of imports come into this border state from Mexico each year.
We believe that our proximity to the Mexican border is an asset. It's not a liability. Mexico is Arizona's largest trading partner by a lot.
For manufacturing supply chains as well as consumers in one of the nation's fastest growing states.
Mexico, in many ways, keeps America fed for much of the year.
But proximity comes with a price. U.S. Customs and Border Patrol is inundated with asylum seekers.
To date, we've seen about 258% increase over last year in the number of family units of Central Americas.
Siphoning from staffing, budget, and other missions like stopping illegal drugs.
What I worry about is how is the situation here in Arizona and across the rest of the southwest border affecting us nationally.
The American people voted for immigration control. That's one of the reasons I'm here.
President Trump beat Hillary Clinton in the historically reliable state, but the smaller margin was noted by some political watchers.
Any Democrat that does manage to win a significant post doesn't run as a Democrat in order to achieve that. They run as a center-right candidate.
Arizona is also undergoing a demographic change. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, there's been an increase in suburban and ex-urban voters, and Latinos now make up 1/3 of the population. All segments Democrats need in the coming presidential election. Brett and Martha, back to you.
Alicia, thank you. With that in mind, let's begin with our questions. Dr. Liz Harris has our first question. Doctor?
Secretary Castro, do you determine the number of people pouring into our country to be a national crisis? And what is your solution?
Thank you very much for the question. I believe that we have a crisis of leadership. If you think about it for a second, when he came into office, Donald Trump said that he was going to solve this, as he put it, this immigration problem. And he's completely failed. Last month, there were 144,000 people that came to the southern border. And in our name, little children have been separated from their mothers. People right now, about 100 people, are in the 100-degree heat of El Paso, Texas, underneath a bridge, being fenced in and kept like animals together without the ability to shower or to change clothes for a whole month. That is the failure that this president has been on the issue of immigration. Right? So I say that we've tried his cruelty and his mistakes. There's a better way to do this. And a couple of months ago, I released what I call my People First immigration plan that says, number one, that we need to treat people with compassion and with common sense instead of cruelty, that we need to put the undocumented immigrants who are in the United States, as long as somebody hasn't committed a serious crime, on a pathway to citizenship, including our dreamers, that we need to invest in an immigration judiciary that is independent and has enough judges and support staff to actually go through all of the claims for asylum so that people are not waiting in limbo years upon years. I mean, people are out there in the country just waiting. Right? We can do a better job than that. And maybe most importantly, we actually need to get to the root cause of this issue. And the root cause of this issue is that in places like Honduras, like Guatemala, like El Salvador, that people can't find safety or opportunity there in their home country. And so that's why a mother would bring her 6-month-old infant more than 1,000 miles on a dangerous journey to the southern border of the United States without any guarantee of getting in, because they're so desperate. It's so dangerous. So I've called for the equivalent of a 21st century Marshall Plan based on mutual respect and working together with these countries and with Mexico, so that people can find that safety and opportunity there, and 144,000 people don't have to come to this southern border to try to find it here. I believe that's a smarter, more effective, and more humane way to approach immigration than the way we've done it. And let me just finish this answer by saying that some people asked me, well, why in the world was this the first policy proposal that you made? And this is an issue that's personal to me. I grew up with a grandmother who came over here from the United States when she was 7 years old from Mexico with her little sister. And they came because their parents had died. And she ended up on the west side of San Antonio. She raised my mom as a single parent. Right? She was basically like a second mother to me. She came here, like I bet a lot of your parents and grandparents did, or maybe some of you have, with hardly anything. And this country provided her the opportunity to work hard, to provide for her daughter, to see her daughter be the first to graduate from high school and then go on to college. And then just 2 generations after she got to the United States, one of her grandsons, my twin brother, Joaquin, is a United States congressman, and the other one is running for president of the United States. That is America. That is what we can do. Thank you for the question.
Secretary Castro, you've said that you believe that entering the country illegally should not be a federal crime, and you just touched upon that. The acting DHS secretary has said that 90% of the people that are apprehended at the border do not qualify for asylum, and 90% of them do not ever show up for their court date once they've been apprehended and released, catch and release. So if it's not a crime to enter the country, is it a crime to not show up for your court date, or at what point is a crime committed in this process, do you believe?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So let's be clear about what we're talking about here. In 1929, the United States passed the Immigration and Nationality Act, and Section 1325 of that basically said that it's a criminal offense to cross the border. However, from 1929 until about 2004, the United States did not enforce somebody crossing the border as a criminal violation. We enforced it basically as a civil violation. And it was after we started enforcing it as a criminal violation that a lot of the problems that we see today of this huge backlog of people out there in the country that are waiting in limbo, of the separation of little children from their parents and the detention and incarceration of these families, when that started happening, right? So I've said there's a better way to do this. I would dispute the statistic from that deputy secretary about how many people actually returned for their court dates. In fact, at the end of the Obama administration, they implemented something called the Family Case Management Program. And this Family Case Management Program essentially worked with folks who had a court date that they needed to come back and appear for. It was based on sort of a case manager form, and they kept in constant contact with the families. They knew where they were. They informed them about their court dates and the responsibility that they had. During that program, people had more than a 98% return rate to come back to their court dates. And so I say, instead of treating people cruelly, instead of wasting money, instead of wondering where people are at, why don't we implement a smart, effective, and humane program like that Family Case Management Program?
It doesn't sound like there's anyone that you wouldn't let in. I mean, is there anyone you wouldn't let in?
No, I haven't said that.
But if it's not illegal to cross the border legally, and it's okay to not show up for, I know you want people to show up for their court date, but you said, that's not where you would draw the line with the law either. So who doesn't, does everyone get in, or who doesn't get in?
Well, I mean, let's just take a step back, right? Because some people have said, for instance, they say, are Democrats for open borders? Let's think about, and the folks here in Arizona know, just like those of us in Texas, we know about the border. We have at our border 654 miles of fencing. We have thousands of personnel on our border. We have planes, we have helicopters, we have guns, we have security cameras.
But you've got 100,000 people crossing the border a month.
Well, and we have a court system that is designed but is underfunded to be able to deal with that. So I would immediately fund enough judges and support staff to actually deal with those cases so that somebody gets an answer.
The doctor's question, you do think it's a crisis?
I think it's a crisis of leadership. I think this president
not
has
like
made
an
it
actual
worse.
crisis.
I think the crisis that exists is driven by the conditions in countries like El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala. And instead of making it better, this president is actually making it worse.
Let's get to our next question. Jessica Welch. Jessica Welch. Yeah, there you are. Go ahead, Jessica. There you go.
So I personally have had my Social Security number used by an illegal immigrant. He was caught and then released on his own recognizance, never to be heard from again. My question is, would you be willing to penalize offenders taking advantage of Americans by having them not released if they are known to be illegal?
Thank you very much for the question. Let me begin the answer to that question by saying, look, all of us know as human beings that regardless of circumstance, whether people are rich or poor, no matter the color of their skin, what their background is, that people commit crime. Crime happens. I'm very sorry to hear about what happened to your Social Security number. I know, how that can be jarring for somebody. Hopefully that was resolved okay. I have said very clearly that if somebody commits a crime like that, that they should be punished for that. It doesn't matter who you are, whether you're an American citizen, whether you're not an American citizen, whether you are undocumented. If somebody commits that kind of crime, then of course I believe that that person should be punished. What I don't believe is that we should be incarcerating these women and children who are fleeing desperate circumstances in those countries and simply are looking for a better life. And then we're keeping them in cages like animals and keeping these men in 100-degree heat underneath a bridge that are fenced in like animals, like a dog pound, basically. I believe that we're better than that as Americans. And so, of course, we need to enforce those laws, whether it's identity theft or it's more serious crimes. I've said that very clearly. And we need to maintain a border that is secure, right? And we can even get better in some ways about border security. Y'all may remember here in Arizona, a couple of months ago, we had the largest bust of fentanyl in our nation's history. 254 pounds of fentanyl. But that didn't come through the border. It came through one of the ports of entry, one of the checkpoints. Why don't we invest more in our ports of entry to catch more drug trafficking and human trafficking that happens there? That's the kind of border security I think that we need to invest more in.
And, Mr. Secretary, obviously the Trump administration is pitching that as well to Congress to try to get those things as well as part of a plan. Democrats have not always talked about immigration like you're talking about it today. Take a listen to a couple of them.
Illegal immigration is wrong, plain and simple. People who enter the United States without our permission are illegal aliens, and illegal aliens should not be treated the same as people who entered the U.S. legally.
Protecting public safety and deporting dangerous criminals has been and will remain the top priority, but we are going to refocus our efforts where we can to make sure we do what it takes to keep our borders secure.
And today, your fellow Texan and presidential candidate, Beto O'Rourke, said that the Obama administration, the Obama-Biden administration, deported too many people and handled the issue poorly. You were a cabinet member during that administration. Do you agree with Beto O'Rourke?
Well, what I've said is that, you know, when I was mayor of San Antonio, I was mayor of San Antonio between 2009 and 2014. I was critical of some of the things that that administration did. I will say there are big differences. Number one, I believe that Barack Obama actually had a concern and a compassion for these immigrants, and that throughout the years, the Obama administration in different ways got better and better on this issue. I think especially of things like DACA and DAPA. But hey, to me, it's not about what party you're in, right? It's about the people themselves. And so I don't care whether it's Democrat or it's Republican. What I care about is that we live up to our best ideals to treat people with compassion, treat them with common sense, and also to be effective in our immigration policy. Is that Democrat? Is that Republican? I think that's common sense, and that's the kind of approach that I would bring.